thank you so much for saying what needed to be said.
You're listening to Binnall of America Audio.
It's still real to me, damn it!
One of the interesting points you make when you're talking about the different groups that have sort of a UFO context to them as far as religious groups, you talk about Scientology being different from the rest of the UFO groups in that they want to keep their UFO influence secret. They really aren't happy that the big UFO element to Scientology sort of gotten out. I wanted to ask you just to elaborate a little bit on that, why you think they want to maintain the UFO influence as a secret within their group when it seems like all the other groups sort of use that as the main thrust of their whole movement.
Well, I suspect that, you know, in the end, we might look back and say it's a cunning move on the part of Scientology. That if their goal was to get their message out and to attract lots of people to accept their faith, then what they've done by keeping it quiet has been a good thing. I mean, if your goal is to spread the truth so that everybody hears your message, that's one thing. If your goal is to induct people into your religious movement and make devoted followers out of them, then it makes an awful lot of sense to keep these things secret. The average person on the street who hears the story of Xenu and the body thetans and the entire intergalactic background to Scientology is going to just reject it outright upon hearing that. Mm-hmm. However, if you have someone who has already been sort of brought into the movement through less outrageous claims, and they've already invested in it, both their time and their finances and their emotions, then they might be far more likely to accept a rather strange claim.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be working. They may not be the largest religious community in the world, but they are certainly have very dedicated members and very powerful members, and have a lot of influence in culture.
Yeah.
So I suspect that's what's going on. It also, of course, plays into a theme that's common in many religions, dating back to the old Greco-Roman mystery cults. There's something unique about having a mystery revealed to you only after you've reached a certain level of experience and devotion. Mm-hmm. It seems to make the message more important if you have to work to get it or pay to get it, than if you're just giving it away. And I think by making people work and pay for it, Scientology is quite successful. It's out now, though. I don't know what tactic they're going to be raising in the future. I know that when I was researching the book, I would always find what were supposedly handwritten notes by L. Ron Hubbard about some of the doctrines of Scientology. And I would find those on the net, and then within 24, 36 hours, they'd be gone.
Oh, wow.
Taken off the net. And then they'd come back again at a different site. Mm-hmm. And so I get the feeling that they are actively policing the information, even though I think South Park and other venues have shared the idea with the world. I think they're still actively trying to keep it under wraps. It was kind of interesting to keep tracking down the documents. There are obviously some people who want the message to get out, probably people who are former members or who are very critical of the movement.
Yeah, because I just saw yesterday or a few days ago some new article about Tom Cruise building a bunker to protect from alien attacks or something like that. So it sounds like this is an ongoing thing with Scientology now, where the UFO element's really getting exposed.
Right, and I expect that will continue. Whether or not that's going to hurt them or help them, I don't know. I don't think the UFO element is as persuasive in popular culture now as it might have been 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. In other words, I don't know that it's as appealing. At least that's what my editor tells me, that people aren't buying the books like they were back in the early to mid 90s.
Yeah,
that there's a drop off in the sales of UFO books. So does this mean that Scientology picked a bad time to reveal their extraterrestrial heritage? I don't know. We'll wait and see. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Is there any sort of theme to all these groups in the sense of their evolution, Do they follow any sort of pattern as far as, starts out, it gets bigger, and then all of a sudden people sort of die out when prophecies aren't fulfilled, or the leader does something where they become not as believed in as much anymore?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. That we do see a pattern in many of these UFO religious movements in which they depend very much on the persuasiveness and the charisma of their founding member. And when their founding member either, ends up doing something wrong or dies, then it's often hard for the group to maintain itself. One good example of the importance of charisma, I think, is the Unarians out in San Diego. Mm-hmm. In that, when they were first founded, they grew rather slowly. It wasn't until I'm drawing a blank on the name, I'm afraid, but it wasn't until the spouse of their founder grew to prominence in the movement that they began to take off and gather a great deal of steam, simply because she was quite charismatic.
Yeah.
Upon her death, however, the group split into factions and has continued to drop off in size. So you can really track it with that. Here you have a movement starts off on a shaky foundation. They find a charismatic leader and they grow rather quickly. And then when the leader dies, things drop off. It also hurt them very much, I think, that they made predictions about extraterrestrial craft landing on the Earth in the later part of the 20th century. Obviously, that didn't happen. And their explanation that they didn't come because we humans aren't yet ready, I don't think was a satisfactory explanation to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so there you have the death of a leader combined with a failed prophecy, and you see these things begin to dwindle away. I don't think it has to be like that, though, and one of the problems now is that it's just too soon. Even though it's been 50 years, 60 years since the modern flying saucer phenomenon began, that's still too soon to see whether or not any of these movements are going to really have a lasting influence and be around for a long time.
Yeah.
I think one of the, if not the earliest, probably the earliest religion to have clear connections with the idea of extraterrestrial life would be the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mm-hmm. And there you see a movement that's began with a very charismatic leader. The leader died. They faced many crises, but as I understand it now, they're one of the fastest growing sects in America today. So there you clearly see a group that's managed to keep on going. Though I have to say they are doing an even better job than Scientology, I suppose, of keeping the extraterrestrial elements of their religion under wraps. That they don't present that in a public forum very much at all.
Yeah.
So that here you have what I would classify as a UFO religion, but everybody within that movement, I think, would deny my claim that that's what they are. But they're doing well.
Yeah. Just to sort of leap to the third part of the book with the ancient astronauts and that sort of discussion, I guess the first thing I want to ask you about is you point out a really interesting paradox that exists in the ancient astronaut theory, and that is respecting the ancient culture and saying, we have to believe their myths and legends and that they were true, and that we have to, take what they write as face value, versus the idea that they would have needed help, that they were a primitive people who needed outside help to achieve, their great monuments and things like that. Talk a little bit about that sort of paradox that exists in the ancient astronaut school of thought.
Sure. I think basic to the claim of the ancient astronaut theory, which is that the origins of human culture and the ancient monuments and ancient civilizations are the result of extraterrestrials visiting the Earth and assisting with the foundation of society and the foundation of culture. Coupled with the belief that the truths of this extraterrestrial encounter are found within the sacred doctrines, the sacred writings and mythologies of ancient peoples. So that when the Hebrew Bible talks about the Nephilim, the giants in the earth who are the descendants of fallen angels or sons of God who have cohabited with human women, what's really being said there according to the ancient astronaut hypothesis, is that these sons of God were really astronauts from another world who came here and produced children with earth women, and they were the giants, famous, influential people of ancient days. And so what's the interesting paradox that you bring out there is that the ancient astronaut theory depends on the assumption that the ancient people are both more backwards than mainstream history tells us, and also that they are more advanced than mainstream history tells us. They're more advanced because while we regard their ancient writings as kind of interesting mythology and fairy tales, they are really recording historical facts and scientific truths, some of which are even beyond modern humanity at this point in our development. On the other hand, the ancient astronaut theory says that the ancient peoples were far more primitive than mainstream history tells us, because they could not have been responsible for the monuments like the Great Pyramid, that they could not have been responsible for even knowing the things that are revealed in their scriptures and in their writings, that this information, that civilization itself could not have come from primitive humans. It had to come from somewhere else. And if you are a nuts and bolts person who doesn't believe in gods and angels so much, then you could posit that extraterrestrials came down and brought those things to the world and were mistaken for gods. So I find that interesting that the ancient astronaut movement sort of gives credit to the ancients by saying they were really quite brilliant and recorded the truth of extraterrestrial visits, and at the same time they were so primitive that they couldn't have possibly built the things and achieved the things that history tells us were achieved by them. I don't know what that dichotomy is about, except it's clearly an approach to the strangeness that one encounters when one encounters an ancient culture. I mean, there's something akin to encountering an extraterrestrial when you visit ancient monuments from a people about whom we know very little.
Yeah.
Why did they build Stonehenge? What could their purpose have possibly been? Why did they build the Great Pyramid? What possible purpose could this have? This seems, by our standards, a waste of manpower, a waste of resources with their limited technology for them to have done this. What's the mystery of their life, their form of life, that would explain this? And there's something about it that's so far away from who we are that it seems sometimes easier to say it's alien than it's just another form of being human.
Yeah.
That humans can be this complex, even without the technology, that there's something basically complex about Homo sapiens, even in their earliest historical incarnations. And so both facets of the ancient astronaut hypothesis, these people were brilliant, and these people were so backwards they couldn't have built the things we see that they built. Both of those are responses to this alienness of different people from so very long ago.
And you see that almost in the modern times, too, because a lot of things that are on the peripheral of the UFO phenomenon, like cattle mutilation and crop circles, those things really quickly get lumped in with UFOs, because UFO seems to be like the catch-all for anything that's strange.
Exactly. In that sense, flying saucers, archaic term, but I prefer it, I think. Flying saucers are the mystical metaphor of the 20th century, the late 20th century. Mm-hmm. And so that much of our mysteries get thrown into that pot. Charles Fort wouldn't have done that because, and Fort, even though he has some sort of extraterrestrial hypotheses here and there, Fort kind of relishes the diversity of the mystery.
Yeah.
And he had no overarching schema which everything would be lumped under for him. But I think we have that now, and I think that's the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that everything from Bigfoot to cattle mutilations has an extraterrestrial explanation.
Yeah, exactly. From a religious perspective, do you think that that it's the sort of situation where with the influx of science and this sort of science versus religion thing, that UFOs takes like the form of science in a way, as a way to counteract the God situation. You know what I mean? Where in the sense that, like, there's lights in the sky, maybe a long time ago, they would have said, you know, that's a sign from God, but now there's sort of an anti-godness going on in society in the form of how science is sort of its own sort of religion. And that ufology is a way to sort of add on to that and be the counterbalance to the God theory. Do you follow what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, the psychologist Carl Jung made this kind of assessment 50 years ago when he said that you know, UFOs are modern day scientific angels. That's the role they're playing. I mean, regardless of what they are they extraterrestrials? Are they mystical beings from another dimension? Are they simply figments of mass psychosis? Who knows? But Jung said, whatever they are, the role they play in our society is akin to the role of angels and spiritual beings and gods. But they're scientific angels. Right? They are advanced civilizations. They're not deities from heaven. They are, in the final analysis, they're beings like us, flesh and blood, whatever color that might be. So you're exactly right. They play the role of gods and deities, but without the supernatural element that's necessary for those things. So that as our world becomes more and more secular, though I suppose it will continue to have the kind of religious yearnings and the need for meaning and understanding that humans always have had. But as we become more secular in our understanding of the cosmos, it only makes sense that we would find our gods in metal ships rather than in flaming chariots.
And that's one of the things you also sort of point out in the paradox of ufology is the belief in science, that even though UFOs don't fit into the scientific world, the nuts and bolts ufologists have sort of like a diehard belief in science, that that's the way to answer the question, how science sort of has become its own religion in a sense, kind of how I alluded to earlier. And there's this sort of paradox in ufology with this hardcore belief in science and using science to prove ufology, and that science is, you know, is the reasoning behind UFOs, versus the fact that science doesn't really want anything to do with UFOs, and ufology is kind of ignored by science. If the theories behind the nuts and bolts ufologists, as far as the extraterrestrial hypothesis go, they're going to have to change science fundamentally if it's proven that, you know, there's ETs flying around in metal ships. So there's sort of a paradox there of belief in science versus trying to change science. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and this is the struggle that any, you know, outsider group within the scientific establishment faces. They're trying to bring about, hoping to bring about, what the philosopher Thomas Kuhn called, and the term's been overused, but what he called a paradigm shift. They're trying to shift science from viewing things this way so that science views things another way, still relying on the empirical evidences of science. And I mean, finally, though, in my perspective, I have to say, I continually see the science of ufology coming up short. Mm-hmm. That the science just isn't there. Will it be there? Perhaps. I don't think that the scientific establishment is turning its back on good, solid evidence at this point. I don't think there is good, solid evidence at this point. That doesn't mean I don't think good, solid evidence might be discovered if we keep on looking for it, but it's not there yet. But it puts nuts and bolts ufology in a bind. How can they remain convinced that that the explanation for this is scientific when science itself refuses to accept their version of the facts? And I'm afraid it's disintegrated into name calling on both sides a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And that ufologists, you know, claim that mainstream science is just refusing to look at the evidence, and mainstream science calls ufologists, you know, all kinds of bad names. And in the realm of science as it should be, there's no reason that ufology shouldn't go on and continue researching this problem in scientific terms. Well, they shouldn't expect the scientific community to accept all of their conclusions just yet.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's enough evidence just yet. There's a friendlier way to go about this. But I think probably the conflict says a lot about how uneasy the relationship will be, however, because despite the fact that ufology wants to be scientific, as long as it places such an incredible amount of weight on eyewitness testimonies, I think it will continue to be ignored by mainstream science. That there's just, eyewitness testimony just isn't going to be the thing that wins the case for ufology.
Yeah.
They're going to have nuts and bolts. Sooner or later, there's going to have to be something. Like
exactly.
In the Bigfoot community, which I'm researching at the moment, there's this constant debate about what do you do? Do we need a body or not? Yes, you need a body, or you need part of a body, or you're never going to have proof, because in the final analysis, the difference between the panda, the giant panda, which was thought to be a mythical creature for many years, the difference between that and a Sasquatch is that we have specimens of one and not the other. And the eyewitness testimony will never tip the scales until you have that hard evidence.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I find so compelling about the contactee movement and the lunatic fringe is that, okay, maybe this is nuts and bolts, and maybe this is a physical thing that we're talking about here. Maybe we can achieve awareness of extraterrestrials through scientific research. But the quest to do so might make us miss something else that's important in the story. We might miss the spiritual truths in our quest for the factual truth.
Yeah.
We might miss something. Nuts and bolts ufology finds itself in the middle between the lunatic fringe and the mainstream scientists, and being pulled in both directions. And I don't know. We'll see how. So far, it tends to still want to, put its fortunes with mainstream science rather than the lunatic fringe. But we'll see if that continues.
Yeah. And then one of the big points you make in the book is that you see fear as a driving force behind ufology, fear of all sorts of things, fear of the government, fear of the unknown, fear of ourselves. Talk a little bit about fear as the driving force behind ufology, because I found that to be one of the big themes of the book.
You can go back as far as the 1950s, in which one of the things I say is that I don't think a lot of the early contactee movement, the early sightings, were fear driven in quite the way they might become later. But we certainly have in the 1950s and 60s these Hollywood movies which use flying saucers to represent our fear of, I suppose, of the Soviet Union and our fears of forces beyond our control at the heart of the Cold War. But it didn't end there. It didn't end with the end of the Cold War. And just as I said a few minutes ago, I believe many of our classical religious hopes and intuitions are being placed on the backs of, lights in the night sky. I think also a lot of basic human fears have become substantiated in the form of extraterrestrials and flying saucers. In simple ways, like walking in the woods at night. It's natural for human beings to be a little bit scared of that kind of situation. Something about our biology, I suspect, that heightens our awareness, pumps a little adrenaline in our system when we find ourselves in a dark forest far away from other people. In this day and age, those kinds of fears are instantiated in the forms of seeing flying saucers and experiencing extraterrestrial phenomena. But it goes deeper than that basic, that kind of basic human fear. I also think, that ufology sometimes begins to take on our fear of in general, our fear of the other. It's not an accident, I think, that we call these creatures in spacecraft aliens.
Yeah.
Just as we call, the influx of people from other countries that so many people in our culture today are afraid of, aliens. I mean, it's this basic fear of otherness, of people and things that are different from us, and it can take on terrifying forms. So that our fear of strangeness symbolically is incarnated in the form of creatures from outer space. A fear of our government, which we probably have a good reason to be afraid of. Fear of our government takes on the form of fear of their relationship with extraterrestrials. Fear of things we don't understand. Fear of the mysteries of life takes on a form of fear of extraterrestrial entities.
Yeah.
Fear of sexual abuse, fear of life's tragedies is displayed in the abductee movement. Now, that's not to say that all of these movements are, and all of these expressions of ufology are nothing more than reflections of our human fears. I'm not making a psychological argument to try to explain these things away. I'm just saying that these are the reasons that these UFO experiences resonate with us in such a way as they do. We're no longer afraid of the devil. Many people aren't anyways.
Mm-hmm.
What are we afraid of? We're afraid of beings from another world.
Yeah.
We're afraid of that, that light in the sky. There's some bad things about that. I mean, I think it's bad when we become so frozen by our fear, as I criticize the abductee movement of encouraging us to be so frozen by our fear that we can't do anything about the problems that we face. But it's also good that the sense of awe, the sense of what the philosopher Rudolf Otto used to call holy terror.
Yeah.
The sense of holy terror. Kind of a basic human sense, I suppose. And extraterrestrials and flying saucers make an easy place for us to place those fears.
Yeah.
We should be careful, though, because, I mean, if we do that too readily, we may miss out on what's really there. We may only see the thing that we're afraid of. Just like if we only, see the invading armada of Hispanic-speaking people as something to be afraid of, we might miss the wonderful, kind people that are moving in down the street from us.
Yeah, exactly. As a student of religion, what do you make of some of the mainstream religions' takes on the UFO phenomenon? Now, I know the Catholic religion they've got the observatory, and a lot of people in the UFO world sort of want to ascribe a UFO-related element to the Vatican observatory, and I know that, I don't know how recently it was, but in the last, 2 or 3 years, they came out with some kind of statement that was like, UFOs and ETs would not change the perspective of the church or something like that. So what's your take on mainstream religion acknowledging the UFO phenomenon and their perspective on it?
Well, a few years ago when a meteorite was found with what might be regarded as evidence of life having existed on Mars at one point, the press immediately wanted to talk to church leaders about, what are the implications of this for your faith? Doesn't this challenge your faith? And I've never really understood that argument, and having talked with lots of Christian people and religious people about the subject, I don't find that it's not something that is a direct threat or challenge to most people's core Christian values. What I do see, though, is this, particularly among more evangelical Christian churches, there is a growing or continuing distrust of UFO religious movements and UFO beliefs as they lump that together with the New Age phenomena, and they regard it as satanic forces, idolatry, and they would say that anyone who claims to have had these kinds of experiences was really being deceived by the devil or something like that. And it's just sort of this, I guess it's nothing more than petty feuding between, religious sects. It's, well, your God is really the devil kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's most interesting is what I've encountered among many mainstream Christian believers, and that is, I've met a lot of people who, go to church on Sunday, but they've seen those lights, or they've had the abduction experience. And I don't see a lot of people weaving those things together too clearly at this point, but I suspect it's going to happen. I hope it happens, because I like syncretism when it comes to religion. I like it when things gets all blended up together. I find that extremely interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's very healthy for a society. So I think that's beginning to happen. Is that people will go to church on Sunday, and on Saturday nights they'll go to a meeting of their local UFO society and don't really see any discrepancy between those things. And I think that's where the future is in terms of extraterrestrials and religion. Official religion will continue to frown on UFO cults. Evangelicals will continue to frown on the UFO movement in general, but the average American Joe Sixpack is probably going to find some way to handle both and believe in both.
Yeah. The sort of conclusion in the book is about new gods and how the UFOs and ETs are sort of like the new gods, but they end up being just like the old gods. I guess just talk a little bit about that religious aspect to the ET UFO phenomenon.
Sure. Yeah. At the end of the book, I tried to express some of my own feelings about the whole thing. I've done that throughout to some extent, but just wanted to try to bring it all together in a few pages. And one of the things that strikes me as most important is that if we begin to think about the UFO phenomena as a religious movement, you see there's a contrast between the gods of ufology and the gods of traditional religion. And I find this most in the contactees of the 1950s. If I had to pick out a group in the UFO community that I'm most enthralled with and most interested in, it would be George Adamski and all of those who came after him. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I find most refreshing and intriguing about them is that their gods, in the sense lowercase g, their gods, their angels, are visitors from Venus, visitors from the planet Clarion. And they are very much like us. They dress in fashionable clothes. They use, in terms of visitors from the planet Clarion, they speak in human slang right out of the 1950s. They make mistakes. They have human emotions.
Yeah.
They dance. They go to cocktail parties. They're very much like us, and yet they're more than we are because they have achieved both technological advancement and ethical, spiritual advancement. They've managed to make themselves better in conjunction with making their technology better. And that, to me, I call that image the image of the new gods. Mm-hmm. That for a short while there were a group of people who were saying, look, we can make ourselves better, and as we make our technology better, so that we can make the world better.
Yeah.
And they really believed that. And because these gods were in strictly human form, they lacked all the things that gods are supposed to have, like omniscience and omnipotence. Mm-hmm. That they couldn't lay down, the answer to everything, because even the gods of Adamski didn't have the answer to everything. Even they faced the mystery of reality. And something of a romantic, I suppose. I find all that very compelling. And so I suggest that for a moment there was a chance that these new gods were being born. I don't think it lasted, though, because the new gods soon in culture took on the qualities of the old gods, so that you have in, say, the movement in Georgia known as the Yamasee Indians, who have claimed extraterrestrial source as their source for being on this earth. You have what's to me a very frightening image of extraterrestrials as kind of a predator species, destroying power, which lays down very strict laws for behavior, and who have achieved a kind of perfectness of power and morality that we humans would never achieve. So the new gods have just become the old gods all over again in that sense. That we no longer, I guess it is that we no longer believe that we can improve our ethics as we improve our technology and together make something incredible happen. I think now we are perhaps so frightened of our technology and so down and so negative about human potential that we've gone back, and in ufology and in the religious circles within ufology, gone back to looking for the old omniscient, omnipowerful God, omnipotent God of the past. We've given up the new gods of Adamski and substituted them with the old gods from outer space instead. But I like the old days in that sense. I wish we could have those new gods back again. I wish we could find a way in our society to believe in human progress that is moral as well as technological, and not only believe in it but make it happen.
Yeah,
that would be a wonderful thing.
And then the only last question I have for you is sort of a big picture thing with ufology, and just what your thoughts are on the landscape of modern ufology, and especially with regards to this exopolitical sort of aspect. You didn't really mention the exopolitics in the book, but that's sort of like the big new movement. It's not so much a religion in a sense, but its own little culture pushing like political activism and that kind of thing. And they're at odds with the nuts and bolts guys. They're kind of almost stepping into the realm of the antithesis to the nuts and bolts people now, as like we said, the contactees, that doesn't seem to be happening as much anymore. Now there's this exopolitics that's butting up against ufology, but that's more of a belief structure in activism, that kind of thing, versus science. Do you have any thoughts on that whole thing, and have you looked at it at all? Well,
I have looked at it, and I imagine that I'm going to do more coverage of that in the next edition. But as it continues to grow and develop, and to probably take on more religious connotations here and there. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And a lot of that rises, of course, out of the ancient astronaut theories and out of the contactee movements themselves. So that you have, the idea of the Ashtar Command and this sort of interstellar government, which calls upon the individuals on the Earth to participate in certain ethical actions in order to bring about a better world so that we can be finally united with the Federation. So I don't know that it's all that new in that sense, right? Because it's rooted in those ideas of sacrifice and service to the planet, to humanity, to the larger picture, which was part and parcel of what at least some of the old contactees had to say. Now, I think it's all connected now, and it's been touched and transformed by conspiracy theorists and a lot of the ideas that one finds there. But you put those things together, the contactee movement combined with the conspiracy theorists, and you begin to get the foundations of the kind of thing that you're talking about. But I suspect it's going to continue to play out. I mean, this is how it happens in the early days of any, not only of any religious movement, but of any cultural movement, and that you have in these early days, even 60 years after, you have, battles between the groups. Will one finally, win out as the voice of belief in extraterrestrials? Well, assuming that we don't have, an extraterrestrial landing on the White House lawn so that all the questions are answered, yes, I think, assuming that doesn't happen, then yes, I think we'll continue to have, hopefully, a very vibrant conversation between the differing groups. I mean, it was 300 years after the birth of Christianity, before the Christian Bible was codified and agreed upon. Those weren't 300 peaceful years. Those were 300 years of, inner battles and struggling with one another and arguing about what was important until finally there was some consensus that arose. And I suspect something like that is going to happen here. Of course, that's barring, as I said, UFOs on the White House lawn, which would probably maybe put an end to a lot of the fighting and show us what's real. But no one, I don't think anymore, is expecting that, which is kind of odd, I suppose, that, in 1954, a lot of people were expecting it. 50 years later, I don't know that anyone wakes up thinking today might be the day when they make contact. I mean, everybody's had to sort of change their way of looking at it to account for the fact that 60 years have passed since we first got interested in this, and the big moment hasn't yet arrived.
Yeah.
Maybe there is no big moment. Maybe there's only the small moments, the personal encounters, the ethics, the religion. Maybe that's what there will be. That finally became, of course, true of Christianity too. It was only after that expectation of the second coming of Christ began to waver after 300 years and there was no return. It was only then that a deeper, more spiritual element of Christianity began to prosper and bloom.
Huh. So you think that maybe the spiritual element of ufology will take hold more as time goes by and we never get any solid answers and we don't get the literal nuts and bolts, then maybe more of a spiritual element will come about from it.
If we don't get the nuts and bolts sooner or later, I mean, I can't think of any other way.
Yeah.
I think belief in extraterrestrials will continue. But if we don't get the evidence, convincing evidence, then the people will continue to believe. They'll just find different ways to talk about it.
Huh. All right. So what's coming up next for you? What's on the horizon for Greg Reese? You said you were doing some Bigfoot research, so maybe that might be it, but you'll let us know what's going on for you coming up.
Sure. Yeah. Right now I'm working on completing a book which should be out probably about this time next year, tentatively titled Weird Science and Bizarre Beliefs. And it will follow the pattern of UFO religion in that I'm going to try once again to be an observer of people who hold beliefs that are different from mine and try to appreciate and respect them. And I'm looking at a broader spectrum this time. I'm looking at the world of cryptozoology, a lot of emphasis on the Sasquatch mystery. I'm also looking at advanced technology, amazing inventions, looking at the world around the idea of ancient technology as well as Tesla technology. And then the third section of the book will be looking at lost civilizations. I'll be talking a little about Atlantis and the idea of the ancient civilization, and also the Hollow Earth theory, both the Hollow Earth theory and the Shaver mystery, caverns under the ground theory. So I've had done a lot of fun research, both reading and meeting people. Been out on a Bigfoot hunt already, and it's been a lot of fun, and I think the book's going to be a great deal of fun too.
Awesome. And that's sometime around this time next year, you say?
Yes, I think so.
All right, well, Greg, thank you so much for coming on the show. The book is UFO Religion, Inside Flying Saucer Cults and Culture, and the website, uforeligion.com. People can get it just about anywhere, I presume. I found it at my local Barnes & Noble, so it's got good distribution. Definitely worth picking up. Very fascinating look at all the different groups that have sort of sprung up over the years and staked their claim to the UFO situation and what happened with those groups, how they came about, where they went and all that great stuff. It's a very thorough read and very well researched, so it was great to have him on the show and talk to him. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Greg.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun.
That does it for this week's edition of BOA Audio Season 3. Big thanks to Greg Reese for coming on the show. You can find out more information on Greg and his book at www.uforeligion.com. Check it out. We're going to skip over BOA Audio listener feedback for one more week, and I guarantee, folks, it's coming back next week on the program. So, if you want to get your emails in line to be a part of this exciting segment, here's how you do it. Simply write to boaaudio@hotmail.com or go to binnallofamerica.com and click the contact button on the left-hand side of the screen. Either one of those methods puts your correspondence into the BOA Audio listener feedback mailbag. Time now, of course, to thank the fantastic binnallofamerica.com staff for your help and support with the audio series and the website. Leslie, Chiron, Arlie, Joe V, and Tina Senna. Week in and week out, the BOA staff is producing tremendous reading material that you can find at binnallofamerica.com. Over the last couple of weeks, Leslie has been covering the Dennis Kucinich UFO story from a number of different angles. And this past week, Chiron posted a fantastic review of the new Alex Jones film, Endgame. So as you can see, there's tons of stuff to be found at binnallamerica.com, aside from the podcast you're listening to right now. As we've been known to say here at the end of the program, if you're only listening to BOA Audio and you're not reading the columns at binnallamerica.com, you're only getting half the story. If you're a long-time BOA Audio listener or an appreciative newcomer and you want to help support the audio series and the website, there's a way you can do that. Simply go to binnallamerica.com or the BOA Audio archive page, click the golden PayPal button, and make a donation. No donation is too small, and all donations go towards helping keep the audio series and the website up and running, advertisement-free, and freely available for all of our great listeners and readers the world over. So, go to BOA, click the PayPal button, and make a donation. It would be greatly appreciated. As we teased at the end of the program last week, I know some folks have a hard time making a donation for something that they're already getting for free. I think there's some kind of psychological issue there. I'm not sure what it is, but I can understand and identify with that sort of thing. So, as a result, binnallamerica.com is on the verge of rolling out a new line of merchandise. This isn't going to be the old-style BOA merchandise. We're going to go in a whole new direction here, folks, and you are going to flip your wig when you see this stuff. The project is already underway. I'm already looking over drafts for this new merchandise, and the feedback I've been getting from the staff of BOA is very promising. I think these are going to be a huge hit, and I'm looking forward to seeing the reaction from the BOA audio listeners when they see this new merchandise. The BOA line will be available soon, probably within the next couple of weeks, and when that rolls out, hopefully you'll pick up some merchandise, and in turn, that'll throw a little change into our coffers here at binnallamerica.com and will help keep the podcast series from being cost prohibitive. So stay tuned to binnallamerica.com for the soon-to-be-unveiled BOA line of merchandise. Next week on the program, it is a very special edition of BOA Audio. It's a theme episode of sorts. It's the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash special. And what's that all about, my friends? What that's about is on-site interviews from the big esoteric double bill that I attended in early October. It's going to be featuring 6 great esoteric researchers talking about a variety of different subjects. Let me give you a rundown on who's going to be on the program next week and what they're going to be talking about. Lauren Coleman will be covering the Dover Demon, Bridgewater Triangle, and the Virginia Tech shootings. Chris Balzano, an up-and-coming researcher who I'm predicting will be one of the breakout stars in esoterica in 2008, will be discussing his work exploring Massachusetts paranormal folklore and phantom clowns. Don Keating will tell us about the White Bigfoot and the Ohio cryptozoology scene. Carl Feint will detail his work looking at USOs, unidentified submerged objects. Don Ecker will tell us about his research into black triangles and Shag Harbor, and former BOA audio guest Chris Stiles will give us an update on what he's been up to since his appearance last spring, and his thoughts on being so closely associated with one specific UFO case, that being Shag Harbor. It's the closest you can get to being there, as BOA Audio brings you this fantastic mix of esoteric audio taped on location at the Mass UFO Show / Mass Monster Mash next week on BOA Audio Season 3. And on that note, there's not much left to say, my friends. Until next week, this is Tim Binnall, thanking you for listening and signing off.